She said, "You promised to marry me when we were kids," and for a moment the entire world around me stopped like someone had pulled the plug on time itself. I stood frozen at the gates of the old community park, sunlight spilling across the cracked pathways and trembling leaves, while her voice, soft, trembling, fragile, echoed through the years we had lost. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I stared at her grown-up face, the same eyes but fuller, deeper, carrying storms I had never seen before. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure whether I was standing in the present or drowning in memories of a promise made under a mango tree when we were barely tall enough to reach the lowest branch. That childhood vow, something innocent, goofy, and sealed with laughter, had returned like a ghost asking to be acknowledged. If you believe in kindness, in forgotten promises that deserve second chances, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Journal so more hearts can find stories like this. Her name was Alara, a quiet girl who had once followed me everywhere like a shadow made of sunlight. Back then, I was just a boy named Ruhan Mirza, with scraped knees, wild dreams, and no idea how messy life could get when we grew older. But years passed like sudden seasons. Families moved, ambitions pulled people apart, and fate drew lines between childhood innocence and adult reality. The last time I had seen Alara was when we were 14, on the day her family left our small town without warning. One moment she had been sitting beside me on the old swing set, promising to stay best friends forever, and the next morning I learned she was gone, no goodbye, no letters, no explanations. I didn't know then that her departure would become a wound I carried quietly through every chapter of my life. Now she stood before me under the warm daylight, dressed in a pale yellow cotton shirt, hair tied in a simple braid that swayed gently with the breeze. The childhood softness in her face had sharpened with experience, but her presence still carried that same calm warmth I used to rely on. She looked like someone who had lived through storms but refused to break. I swallowed hard, trying to appear composed even though my pulse was running like a river after heavy rain. The town around us looked familiar yet distant, the small food stalls, the cricket field where we had once run barefoot, the dusty library steps where she used to read while waiting for me to finish my homework. It was like stepping into a life paused long ago, only now replaying in high definition. Alara explained that she had returned after 12 years because her mother insisted on being close to her ancestral home. What she didn't say, at least not in those first few minutes, was why she had searched for me the moment she arrived. And when she brought up the promise, our ridiculous little vow of marriage that we had made while building sandcastles, I didn't know whether to laugh or collapse under the weight of everything unsaid between us. The more she talked, the more I sensed there was something fragile underneath her calm expression. Her voice, though steady, held a quiet exhaustion, like she had been carrying heavy decisions for a long time. She looked at me with a mixture of hope and dread, and I felt as if she was bracing herself for disappointment, for me to reject the childish promise so easily. I wanted to tell her that I had never forgotten it. That her leaving had marked me in ways I never admitted. That every girl I ever tried to love afterward had walked into a heart that was already half occupied by a memory. But instead, I asked, "Does that promise still count?" The moment the words left my lips, something inside her cracked, not broken, but released, like a held breath after years of waiting. She stared at me, eyes widening, and I realized I had just stepped into a territory deeper and more delicate than I imagined. We walked through the park together, and as the sun painted gold across the grass, she opened up piece by piece. She told me how her parents had separated, how life in the city had been chaotic, how she had worked 2 jobs while studying, how loneliness had become her shadow. She said she often thought of the town, of the swing set, of the boy who used to share his snacks even when he had very little. She said she thought of the promise not because she expected it to come true, but because it reminded her of a time when she felt safe and understood. I listened to her, my chest tightening with every word. I had always imagined her leaving because she chose a better life, but hearing her struggles felt like someone was rewriting my memories with painful ink. I wished I could have been there for her. I wished she had not carried her burdens alone. As we walked further, she stopped near the spot where we once buried a tiny metal box filled with childish treasures, dried flowers, little notes, and a plastic ring we had called our marriage ring. The soil had long been disturbed by weather and time, but the ghost of that memory hovered between us. She looked at me with trembling eyelashes and whispered that she never had the courage to look for me before today, fearing I would have forgotten everything. I told her I never forgot. Not a single thing. For the next hour, we sat by the lake, letting silence speak where words faltered. Ducks rippled the water, sunlight danced across the waves, and children played nearby, yet all I could feel was the weight of her hand resting inches away from mine, close enough to ache but far enough to remind me that fate wasn't something to be rushed. Slowly, she began sharing something darker. Alara admitted she had recently ended a long, painful engagement, one where kindness had been replaced by control, where love had become a cage. Her voice shook as she explained how she had lost herself in trying to make it work, and how breaking it off had cost her not just emotional strength but also the trust she once had in her choices. That was when I understood why her eyes carried storms. She wasn't asking me to fulfill a childhood promise. She was asking if there was still a place in this world where she belonged without being judged, questioned, or made to feel small. The rest of the afternoon felt like rediscovering an unfinished chapter. We walked past the old shops, visited the library steps, bought lemonade from the same stall run by a different owner, and laughed shyly at the awkwardness of reconnecting after years of silence. Daylight softened into evening glow, yet the time felt full, not rushed. As we reached the road where we had to part, the question floated between us like a soft whisper, "What now?" In that moment, I didn't want her to leave again. I didn't want another 12 years to pass with unanswered questions and unsaid feelings. So I asked if she would meet me again tomorrow, just to talk, to rebuild, to figure out what our hearts were trying to tell us. Her smile, shy, uncertain, luminous, was enough to make hope bloom inside me like spring after drought. Over the next several days, our meetings became the brightest part of my life. We went on long walks, shared childhood secrets we had forgotten, ate street food like teenagers, and talked about dreams we were afraid to chase. And as I watched her grow comfortable, watched her laughter return, watched her shoulders loosen from the invisible weight she carried, I knew I was falling for her again, not the memory of the girl she was, but the woman she had become. Strong, gentle, flawed, beautiful in ways that weren't defined by appearance but by resilience. Something inside her changed too. Her eyes stopped avoiding mine. Her voice grew steadier. She stood a little taller, breathed a little freer. And sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, she gazed at me with a softness that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds after days of rain. But one afternoon, when I asked what she expected from us, she hesitated. Fear flickered inside her like a candle in wind. She admitted she was scared of hurting me, scared of repeating her mistakes, scared of building new hope on foundations that life could shatter again. She said she treasured me too much to risk becoming another storm in my life. I told her that love wasn't about avoiding storms but about walking through them with someone who mattered. Her eyes filled, but she didn't speak. Days passed. Emotions deepened. But uncertainty still hovered. Until one Sunday morning. She asked me to meet her at the old mango tree, the same one we had stood under as children when we made the silly promise that started all of this. Daylight filtered through the leaves, scattering golden shadows around us. She stood there wearing a simple sky blue kurta, her hair loose, sunlight catching the edges of her lashes. She looked nervous. Vulnerable. Hopeful. She said she had thought about everything. About her fears, her past, and the future she wanted to build. She said she didn't know what destiny had planned, but she knew one thing with certainty: she didn't want to run anymore. Not from her feelings. Not from the possibility of happiness. And not from me. She said the promise from childhood didn't bind us. But the connection we shared, now real, intentional, grown, was something she wanted to explore, slowly, honestly, bravely. I stepped closer, gently taking her hand, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. She squeezed my fingers lightly, and it felt like destiny had stitched two broken timelines back together. The sunlight above us warmed our skin, and I realized the promise did count, not because we had made it as kids, but because life had brought us back to each other when we were finally ready to keep it. If this story touched your heart, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Journal so more people can feel the warmth of stories that remind them love can return even after years of silence.